Buenos dias, amigos y amigas. It is so great that you are all here this day, and I am terribly sorry that I am not with you in the flesh. I am at this very moment preaching a sermon at Friends Congregational Church in College Station, Texas, at a special celebration for the ministry of my very good friend, Reverend Dan DeLeon. And in commemoration of his 10 years of ministry there at Friends Congregational Church. When Friends called me and asked me to give this sermon at this wonderful celebration of Dan's ministry there, I just could not say no. Dan and I graduated seminary together. He preached my ordination service. We were groomsmen in each other's weddings. I was there for the birth of his daughter. We have relied on each other's counsel and wisdom and support and love during the over 15 years that we've known each other now. And so when Friends gave me the call and said, please, Daryl, come, it would mean so much to Dan, and it would mean so much to us if you came and gave the sermon here today. I knew that I needed to be at Kensington. I know I need to be at the Ecclesiastical Council of Sheila Naismith this afternoon. But there are just certain people and certain things that no matter who they are and no matter how of bad timing it is, you make sure that you go and you say yes. And I know that you have those type of people in your life as well. So I am sorry that I'm not there with you in the flesh, but yet again, we have this wonderful technology in which I'm able to provide the message today and continue on with our sermon series of the Slow Church. In 2011, in my church in Kalispell, I preached what I refer to as my time machine sermon. I've always been fascinated by time machines, those scientific and science fiction tropes which allows us to go back in time or forward in time to right a wrong or to see how things will eventually end. And so I gave a sermon asking the congregation that if you were gifted with a time machine and you could go back in time and you could visit your 15-year-old self, what would you say? But I think the real reason why time machines are so fascinating to us is this idea that we could go back in time and right or wrong and avoid the mistakes that have hindered our progress as human beings. And yet then my idea about that, my idea about going back in time and talking to 15-year-old Daryl and saying, listen, man, like you're going to mess up a lot and this is how you can avoid all that, was changed 2 weeks ago, when a group of Kensington Community Church people and myself participated in the Reality Changers trivia contest that was used as a fundraiser to raise money for this wonderful nonprofit, which you're going to hear about more next week as part of our mission moment. During the Reality Changers trivia contest, after one of the rounds of trivia were over, we had a young woman stand up to share her story. And what an amazing story it was. She started in Reality Changers, this nonprofit which provides support, tutoring, life skills, interview skills for 8th graders and freshmen who could possibly become their family's very first college attendee and hopefully their family's very first college graduate. They see college graduation as the ticket out of poverty and part of the upward mobility ladder that we so want for the generation that comes after us. Reality Changers does. And so they had this young woman share her story. She joined when she was a freshman in high school, and she was now talking to us as a sophomore at UCSD. She had been shepherded and scaffolded and supported in her high school journey, and she said that if she could go back and talk to her first grade self, that she would say to her, be patient. Now that might sound like really easy advice. Be patient. But it was in her first grade that this young woman remembered going out after school was over with her mother, diving into trash cans and dumpsters and recycling bins, pulling out all the cans and glass and metal that they could to turn into recycling centers for money that would go towards providing for the very basic necessities of her life. And when she was a senior in high school, and the time had come for her to take her advanced placement tests, she remembered that as her other friends and colleagues and peers in high school were stressing out about taking these tests because they truly could help them get into college and provide that first step into getting their college graduation. But as much as she was stressed out about these tests as her peers were, what really scared her was it was the first time that she had ever allowed her mother to go dumpster diving and picking through recycling bins and trash cans by herself at night in the dark in parks and in alleyways, and she was scared for her mother. Of course, she did graduate from high school. She did get into San Diego State, or she did get into the University of California, San Diego. And if she could go back in time, she said, and talk to her first grade self, she would say, be patient. It gets better. 12 years from now, you're not going to be digging through trash cans, but you're going to be a freshman at UCSD. You're going to meet this group of people, and they're going to become like family to you. And they will believe in you and support you, and they will bring you to this place where your future looks bright and you have a tremendous amount of hope in the world and in tomorrow. Be patient. Is that what you would tell yourself if you could go back and tell a younger version of you? Would your sage wisdom and advice be patient? It gets better. Paul's letter to the Corinthians that Patrick read for us today is one of the most beautiful and most famous parts of Scripture. It is read in probably 80% of all wedding services, though people are starting to rebel against that and intentionally choose other texts. But it's still one of the most popular and famous bits of Christian literature. It is the great hymn to love, and it is all about God's love and God's love for all of the creation, and particularly God's love for humanity. And the very first qualifier, the very first modifier that Paul uses to describe God's love is patience. Love is patient. Not passionate, not inflamed, not powerful, not all-encompassing, but patient. Love is patient. And in this fast-paced, now, I can't get it fast enough world, where microwaving something for a minute is too slow, and when our phones don't download something instantaneously, we want to throw it across the room, and when we have a line at the grocery store, which is 3 people long, we sigh and just feel so frustrated and agitated by the fact that we have to stand in line at the Vons again. In this fast-paced, instant gratification, now world, patience is rarely preached. And it is even more rarely practiced. And it definitely has lost its connection to love. Unconditional love. God's love for the world. But according to Paul, it's the most important aspect to love, because if it wasn't, Paul would not have put it first. It is the essential quality of God's love for humanity and God's love for creation, that God's love is patient. And it's also essential to good leadership. A couple of months ago, President Obama gave a podcast. It was his very first podcast interview that he had ever done in the 6 years that he had been president. And he came on a podcast called WTF by Mark Maron, who's a comedian. And Mark Maron asked him, President Obama, I bet you get a great deal of hate mail But President Obama actually said, even though he gets a great deal of letters that are not happy, from people who are not happy with his leadership as president, what he mostly gets are letters from people who are supporters of his, who possibly even voted for him, but that they would have liked to seen things done just a little bit differently. Those letters that President Obama gets more than any, more than hate mail and more than, you're a Muslim terrorist, pinko commie, is President Obama, we love you, we think you're doing such a great job, we're so happy that you're our president, but, and then fill in the blank of what is the most important issue for that person. But in the midst of that podcast, President Obama gave a beautiful metaphor of what it means to truly be a loving leader of a nation as diverse and dynamic as the United States. President Obama said that the government of the United States of America is like the largest aircraft carrier that has ever been put out to sea. And for the most part, that this aircraft carrier sails along at a pretty good clip in pretty smooth and safe waters. And that the leadership that the president provides is basically to make sure that this ship stays afloat. And yet at the same time, certain course corrections need to be made so that when you see that an iceberg is coming up, you can avoid that iceberg. But of course, if you are not paying attention to the long view, if you do not have a sense of what is coming 10, 15, 20 years down the road, then you're going to probably most likely going to hit this iceberg. But we know that you can't turn an aircraft carrier very quickly. They are unwieldy mechanisms and vessels. So what you have to do is you have to make a quick and subtle 2 to 3 degree turn, a slight course adjustment in the way that you are headed. Because if you wait until you come up on the iceberg and you make a quick adjustment, the fact is you're going to sink the ship. But if you see where you're trying to get to, if you have a sense of the long view, and you make that course correction that is 2, 3 degrees turn, years and years, so that 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, you can avoid the iceberg, then you'll have clear sailing. And that is the patient, loving approach that a president needs to take to guide our country to smooth and safe waters. Love is patient, according to President Obama. Love is patient, according to the Apostle Paul. The great theologian and ethicist Stanley Hauerwas describes the essence of the slow church movement by emphasizing what philosopher Paul Virilio notions that speed is violence, and that we are called by local church communities to be islands of patience in a world of speed. There is so much happening in our world, politically, economically, socially, civically, environmentally. And I think that we lean into the reality of globalization, and that when we do that, we have this deep longing, a deep longing for home and a sense of stability. When the world is rushing all around us, we need to practice patience, have the long view, make slight 2, 3 degree adjustments so that we can avoid the catastrophe to come. So we need to slow down. We need to be patient. We need to see patience as a gift of God so that we can do the reconciling work of God in the world through our own local community. And the slow church practices patience in the art of dialogue, conversation, listening to each other. As we learn to open ourselves up to one another in conversations, we find joy and grow deeper into the interconnected life that God intends for all of creation. We come to know that other people are not just other people, but they're truly gifts of God. And we learn to trust each other, even when there is sharp disagreement. And if you want to see this in its most beautiful and gracious and compassionate form, I invite you to our Bible study at noon on Wednesdays. It's beautiful to see people ardently disagree and yet hold each other patiently in love. We know that there are many injustices in the world. Many of you have experienced them firsthand. And those injustices are rooted in unhealthy desires that plague humanity: selfishness, greed, jealousy, impatience, othering, and discrimination. And a slow church creates a space where we can begin working honestly and gently through these many desires. So we need to slow down, sit down, listen, converse, dialogue, so that hopefully as we do so, we'll find the reconciling and transforming shalom of God sweeping throughout our lives, sweeping through the streets of our neighborhood, and sweeping through the byways of our nation and around the world. Love is patient. The question is, are we? Well,